Civil War photographer Mathew Brady. Innovator, influencer, and disastrous disappointment. Mathew B. Brady was born around 1822 to 1824 near Saratoga Springs, New York, to Andrew and Samantha Julia Brady. Little information is known about his early life, so his exact date of birth, full name, and many details of his upbringing are unknown. Brady moved to New York City in 1843 and began working with artist William Page and artist-inventor Samuel F.B. Morse, the inventor of Morse code. He started to revolutionize daguerreotype cases and frames before opening a daguerreotype studio in 1844. Daguerreotype was the first successful form of photography, named after Louis-Jacques Mond Daguerre of France. The method used copper plates coated with silver iodide, which were exposed to the light in a camera. This was fumed with mercury vapors that were then made permanent by a solution of common salt, forming a permanent image. In 1845, Brady began a mission to photograph as many famous individuals of his time as he could. Some individuals include Daniel Webster, Edgar Allan Poe, James Fenimore Cooper, and an elderly Andrew Jackson. He compiled his portraits together to form a gallery of illustrious Americans in his studio. After the success of his New York studio, he opened a second studio in Washington, D.C. in 1848. This studio was opened so that Brady would be able to take photos of presidents, cabinet members, congressmen, and governmental leaders that lived in Washington, D.C. Due to his strategic location, he was able to create, copy, or collect photographs of every president from John Quincy Adams, the 6th president, to William McKinley, the 25th, except for William Henry Harrison, who only served in office for 30 days. In Washington, D.C., Brady met Juliet Handy, nicknamed Julia, and the two got married in 1850 and moved to Staten Island. Then, in 1852, Brady opened a third studio, once again in New York. However, by this time, his eyesight was failing, and he was relying heavily on his assistants for the actual photography. His main assistant was Alexander Gardner. Gardner knew his way around the wet plate photographic process, which started to take the place of daguerreotype photography. Gardner was placed in charge of the Washington, D.C. Gallery in 1858. The Civil War broke out in 1861, and Brady decided to make a complete record of the battles. He hired a staff of around 20 photographers that helped him capture the carnage of war. Brady mainly organized and supervised the project. It is likely that he didn't photograph more than a few battlefields of Bull Run, Antietam, and Gettysburg. He refused to give individual credit to the photographers, and therefore many left his employ. Brady's illustrious Civil War project ruined him financially. He had spent over $100,000 on the project, confidently expecting the government would take interest in the photos and compensate him for them. The government took no interest, and he was forced to sell his New York studio and declare bankruptcy. He faced complications after a streetcar accident and died in a hospital in New York, January 15, 1896. The father of photography died penniless and alone, virtually forgotten to the world. Today, Brady's work and historical record is divided between the National Archives and the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C. Even though he did not receive the financial restitution for his photography, his representation of the Civil War opened the eyes of common Americans that otherwise would not have been able to see the effects of war. Brady shocked the nation in 1862 by displaying the first photographs of the carnage of war with his exhibit titled The Dead of Antietam. Photography was extremely important in spreading awareness about the real costs of war. Brady and his team may not have received the accolades or material wealth they deserved, but certainly revolutionized photography and media for future generations to come.